Hi everyone, I'm Tim Von Rieden, better known as Von Art Online. I do these weekly Wednesday live streams every Wednesday at 2 p.m. Central Time, usually to discuss art, show some techniques within the art subject matter, or maybe just have some fun in general. I've been doing a lot of tutorial streams lately, and this one is gonna continue that chain of path, or that, what would that be called? The chain of, I guess, chain of tutorials, education maybe. And we're gonna talk about how to draw the eyes. And I don't want to just talk about how to draw eyes specifically. I want to also talk about understanding eyes in general and how what their anatomy is. I won't go too far into it, but we'll definitely take a closer look at the eyes and understand how to draw them so that you're not just always drawing them either from face forward or from a perfect side view, because there are tricks on drawing each of those angles, and we will go ahead and discuss that. Let me go ahead. I'm going to make my face camera way smaller. That's not the right one. There we go. I'm going to make it way smaller. Like that. And if you have any comments or questions along the way, feel free to ask. The only announcements I really have are we have a Discord community below, or there's a link to the Discord community below, and we have some challenges going on right now. We have a critique stream coming up in 2 weeks, so if you want to be a part of that, there's more info on how to submit below in the Discord. I have 2 new prints coming on to the Etsy, either tomorrow or the next day. It'll be the giant angel piece I just did for Imagine FX, and that was my vindication. And then the collector, so the one with all the arms that was inspired by you guys during the Twitch stream last fall. And let's see, do I have anything else? Oh, I did start my Kickstarter campaign. Well, I gotta stop saying it like that. It makes it sound like it's live. I started working on my Kickstarter campaign as well as working on the 3rd sketchbook that it will be for. So that will go live in April. I believe April 26th is the date I'm looking at. And I will be doing a lot of work on that. And I'm doing a lot of work right now on the back end, creating a business, so the official LLC of Von Art. It is not fun. If there is any one of you out there that is curious about learning how to create like an official business and have a bank account associated with that, have an S corp or LLC, and then have payroll through it, all that good stuff that sounds really boring, it is really boring, and I don't want to sugarcoat it either. But I think eventually I might do a tutorial or like a YouTube video on how to start a business if you're an artist, like officially, and kind of give you the steps as I'm kind of stumbling through the process. But thankfully the people at the bank, then people, my accountant, and all these people are kind of helping me through it. And I'm just being really honest along the whole way of, I don't know anything. Please teach me. I literally am a sponge for you to throw information for me to soak in. And I have been doing just that, but it is a lot and it's taking up a lot of my time. Unfortunately, it's kind of digging into my actual drawing time. That's why I've been drawing a little less, but I promise I am still drawing. You can still see I have these 2 drawings up here. I won't give away what they are fully, but just know I'm still working on them along with my swordplay illustrations, and I try to work on them at least an hour each a day. So that's kind of been my goal, managing all this at once. Anyways, today we are focusing on drawing the eyes. So let me talk about why we are doing the eyes today. This was a stream suggested by one of our wonderful community members, and I have done a lot of tutorials in the past on drawing the eyes, and even with CG Cookie, I can show you. One of the first ones I did was this little number here, and it was to kind of just break down the eye. And now looking at it, now that I'm older, I can go more into even more detail on drawing the eye and understanding the eye, because I've drawn so many of them and I've done more research, and a lot of it has to just come down to practice. So my number 1 tip obviously is to draw a lot of them. You want to get better at drawing eyes, draw 100 of them. And it's that kind of age-old saying of practice makes perfect. And as much as I know it sometimes can be really frustrating and time-consuming, it is worth the effort. I promise you. Do not overlook it, and you will see an improvement in actually any subject matter, not even specifically eyes. Literally anything you want to draw, you can learn and improve it through not only practice, because while I think practice is important, I think having a critical eye and being very almost analytical while you're drawing it is just as important. because you can practice all you want, but if you're drawing the same eye with the same mistakes over and over and over and over and over again, I don't think you're really learning. I think you're just learning how to be more, I guess, habitual with drawing and making it, a forefront, which is great. But I think it's also important to look at your work and, critique it constructively and objectively. That way you can point out what the flaws are and how they can be improved upon, because without that, you really are just kind of repeating the cycle of either inaccuracies or proportion issues. And the sooner that you can kind of recognize that you might be making those, the sooner that you can correct them, which is hopefully what this stream today will help with any of you guys that might be struggling with drawing eyes. And I took a page of notes, so I'm going to go down into it, and I'll kind of give you guys a brief as to how I'm going to structure this stream. So the first one is I'm going to talk about jumping into it and why drawing things over and over can be an issue. Then I'm going to talk about understanding the eye. I'm going to actually pull out some clay and this candle as an example for understanding how the eye actually works and the skin folding around it. So this will be fun. This is very new for me. Then we'll talk about muscle memory recreations, which is basically talking about same face syndrome and why that happens. How to change up the different looks of the eyes, including the shape of it, the brow, the color, all that good stuff. And then we will go into the next section where I will specifically break down the 3 main sections of the eye, which are the eyeball itself, consisting of the cornea, the white part, the iris, the color part, and then the pupil, the black part. And then from there, the skin around it, because... Oh, well, thank you, Tijal, for another tier of subscribing. 15 months. You get 4 asteroids. Or actually, I'll do 15. Let's see here. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. 15 asteroids from me. Thank you, thank you. And then the third one would be the eyebrow and the eyelashes. And those can actually be very important because I'll talk more about it later, but when you make them so crisp and dark, I feel like it can almost offset the work you put in beforehand, and it can be really off-putting because you have these really crisp, spider-looking eyelashes, but then you have a really soft eyeball and skin shading underneath, and they just don't mesh well together. So I'll show you how to mesh them, and even if you have more of a stylized take on drawing eyes, I'll show you how to work that and have it be somewhat accurate even though it's stylized, because I think that's a big question for a lot of people that draw nowadays is, making sure that their style doesn't have to necessarily fit in the realism box. And from there, there's 3 more things that I'm going to do. We're going to talk about how to draw the eyes at different angles. I feel like this is one of the number 1 questions when drawing eyes, and I will do my best to explain how I do it and hopefully help you. A realism demo, so I'll do a step-by-step on drawing an eye realistically and how I go about doing that. And the third one is a style demo, so how to draw an eye that might not be 100% realistic, but kind of falls into more of a stylized look. And why, thank you for following. Okay, so let me pull my Cintiq closer. It's just been easier for me to do some of these digital rather than traditional because I can change layers, I can pull up references, all that good stuff. So let's talk about the very beginning of drawing the eye. So when we're a younger artist, and I've done this, I feel like we've all done this, we all want to draw people and draw characters, and I feel like oftentimes our eyes, we put a lot of focus into one, right? And actually, I'm going to do a really quick sketch of one. So their big issue. Why do people always call me during my stream? Nope, I'm going to put my phone on the floor. Unavailable. A lot of the times, we just kind of, what would this be called? Kind of freehanding. We jump into it without any underlying markings or underlying anatomy or proportion, and we can create a really pretty looking eye. I'm trying to create like a more ugly looking eye. I guess this is kind of whatever. But what the problem is, you draw one finished eye, and then guess what? You have this space over here, which is the dreaded other eye syndrome. So you have this really nice looking eye on the right side. and then your left side oftentimes looks like this, and you're like, what happened? Why did my eye look so great on one side, but then on the other side, it looks like a 4-year-old representation of myself drew this? And a lot of it has to come down to understanding how the eye is placed in the face and how to draw it at different angles so that this scenario never becomes intimidating again, but rather you can confidently go in and attack it and feel comfortable knowing where the placement of the eye should be, how to draw the skin around it, and we'll go through all of that. So I'm going to get rid of this whole head. Actually, I'll just move it to the side. So I'm going to put a big X. No. And because we have Photoshop, I can use color. So no, don't want to see this. No, no, no. Actually, I might make a little... I'm going to have a little color palette on the top here. So you might be able to jump in and freehand eyes. I know I was bullheaded enough in college to think that's how I was always going to do it. But I really think I got better at drawing faces and specifically eyes in general when I really took the time to understand how the eye actually works. And when I did my tutorial with CG Cookie, I feel like this was a good starting point, but it still was lacking in a lot, and we'll talk about that further. But the one thing I would say did change the way I looked at eyes was the whole idea of a convex and concave section of the eye. And basically, we need to remember that the eyeball itself is a sphere, and it is just hidden underneath these the skin folds that make it look expressive. It can make it look more full or more suspicious looking, and the skin folds are the ones changing. Our eyeball actually does not, and it's the idea that sometimes creeps people out that while we're sleeping, our eyes are still. They're still eyeballs, but it just has a skin of, or a layer of, skin covering it. But they're still open if you want to think of it that way. And when you're thinking of the eye as a sphere, that's a great starting point. But in actuality, there's a little bubble where your iris is. And this is the contact that you will see right here. And it's this little bubble. Now I'm exaggerating it to really showcase the bubbleness of the eye, but from a side view, it would look like this little bump. And I always think of it as a contact lens. That's the easiest way for me to remember. And the iris and the pupil are more flat on that, round part of the eye, but it's the bubble that kind of gives the illusion of it being perfectly round, when in actuality it is not. So let me look at my notes. Oh yeah, and that's why you always see the highlight usually more in the darker section of the eye where the shadow is, and then the lighter part on the bottom half of the eye, because if you have an overhead lighting scenario, more likely than not, that light source is going to pass through the bubble part of the eye, that film, and it's going to leave a reflective shiny mark, and then it's going to pass through and it's going to just pool in the bottom of that iris. Now the thing that I have wrong with this tutorial is the iris itself isn't perfectly concave. Concave means it's more dipped in, convex means it's dipped or it's pushed out. And the iris actually has more of like a donut look to it. So, it's kind of not exactly concave. Man, has it really been this wrong since I've worked with digital? Should take that long to make a donut. But it has like if this was like a side view, kind of like this. But light would still pool on the bottom, and it would still give the look of it. That's why eyes appear this way, but it's not completely concave. It has more of a donut-y appearance if you look close up at them. And then the lines inside, that's more detail stuff. We're not even going to touch that till near the end, because I think too many or at least I shouldn't generalize. For myself, I focus way too much on the finer details, and I really need to be saving that for the last part of drawing an eye. And that includes the eyelashes, the lines on the iris, the wrinkles around the eye, maybe the pores, things like that should be saved more to the end. And I think we need to focus more on the foundations and the basic forms of the eye first. So, before I jump around even more, because I feel like I had such a weird morning doing business stuff, and I'm jumping into the stream late, let me go ahead and do this example with the clay. Okay, so I'm going to do this as close as possible. This is a candle, and it is a round candle, obviously. And I'm going to show you how the skin folds on the sphere itself so that we can better understand how to draw it. And if you look at the way that the artists of yesteryear, especially ones that worked with clay and marble, they definitely understood skin folds, I think, better than we do today, because oftentimes they're so minimized that it almost looks as if the skin is like a really, really thin sheet of paper that covers the eyes. But in reality, they're thicker. And it's the same problem with where we begin our eyelashes. Eyelashes do not begin where the cornea and the skin folds meet, but they actually, I'll show it later too on a drawing. The eyelashes themselves begin on the edge of these skin folds. So let's see here. I'm going to create an upper fold and then a lower fold, and I'll wrap the candle so you can see what the heck I am talking about. Otherwise, I just sound crazy. And I'm going to make it, once again, exaggerated so that I can better explain myself on how to draw the eye. While I'm doing that, let me look at some of the questions here. Red She-Wolf says, would you prefer a Twitch subscription or Patreon subscription? Definitely Patreon. Twitch takes a pretty big cut, and honestly, all you really receive on Twitch are the little emojis, and while I do appreciate the support regardless, I would say you'll get more bang for your buck on Patreon. So if that is something that you are interested in doing to help myself continue on this independent art lifestyle, I have a link to my Patreon below. Okay, so you can see with the skin fold, hopefully it's not too bright for you guys. Actually, there we go. You can see how there's a clear defined edge, and then there's a top and bottom. The bottom we'll never see because that's the one inside of the eye, but the top one would consist of the creasing that appears above and below the eye. So here, I'll move it up just a little bit. Actually, I might need more clay. This is one giant sphere. All right, so when thinking about the eye, let me do the top half first. Actually, while I'm doing that, let me get another question here. What's that drawing in the background? That is, well, there's a couple. But the one that you're probably talking about is the Spider Queen, or the Hollow Queen. And I was meant to finish it for last year's Drawtober. It was day 31, which was Hollow Queen instead of Halloween. A little spooky pun for you guys. But I did not finish it because I had a surprise con that weekend. And excuses. I'm handing them out for days, and I did not finish it. So I am finishing it before this year's Drawtober begins. And we're changing up the format of this year's Drawtober. I've already talked to Key and Deandra, and we're actually bringing in a new person, hopefully. I can't announce it yet because we need to confirm it with the fourth person, but it is an artist that has really kicked butt on Drawtober the past years, and I think they'll be a great addition to hosting it alongside myself, Gawky, and Deandra Pop Art. Okay, so I'm going to make the lower fold for this eyeball. Give me 1 second. Art by Hoshi says, do you have any tips for drawing manga or anime eyes? Yes, and that's part of my last demo, which is the stylized demo section. And it's kind of talking about how even manga artists, they learn realism first, and then they deconstruct it to basically be able to draw it fast and effectively while being efficient, but they still work off of the same foundations as realism. Okay. I want this to show without it. Oh, there we go. So I'll get a little closer. You know what? I'm going to have this overlap. Because this is looking a little inappropriate. let me create one fold on the top. Because I feel like this is looking a little inappropriate. Oh, why is my bracelet screening? For some reason, my camera makes things that are yellow basically green screen. Digital was going to show me how to fix it, but I think it's kind of cool. So I just kind of leave it. I'm sure the people that are new to this Twitch stream are like, does he even know? But I do know. I kind of like the look it gives. Oh, you're talking about this piece. Yeah, this is my merman. This is Tristan. So if you want to see a little close-up of that. He was the first kind of full mermaid I've ever drawn. I guess I should say merman. And I was signing a bunch of my large prints yesterday, as my assistant Kat was helping me with them. Oops. Gotta make it a little longer. What do I think of Kingdom Hearts 3? I love it. I think the story is a little eye-rolly still, but everything else has been phenomenal for me. Man, I really should have just modeled this in clay before the stream started. That way I'm not wasting your time watching. This is like the fastest I've ever had to sculpt something. Okay, so imagine, you know what, to make this look a little less... Let me grab a marker. I wonder if they'll work on wax. Oh, they work pretty well. All right, good enough. So this is our makeshift clay eyeball. Now the reason I wanted to make it in clay is because usually you can see how, and I really emphasize the pockets here, but you can see how the skin marks, let me grab my pencil, the skin folds, there's like this depth. There's this distance from where the cornea and basically the eyeball in general ends, and then the skin flap, there's like this little shelf, and then it falls into the rest of the face. And then same with the upper one. Now this upper eye is going to have a deeper pocket up here because when you blink, it's your upper skin fold that's going up and down for the most part, and not so much your lower eyeball. And if you think about it, if you try to reverse it, how creepy that would be if we had our lower eye flap go up and down. If that was the case, there'd be a deeper skin fold underneath because the skin is opening and closing and it's pushing and creating that crease on the skin. Some people have a much deeper inset crease. Some people have one that's barely visible at all. So it is dependent on the person and it will vary, but in general, this is the type of skin folding that will happen around an eyeball. And also this little shelf here is so important because the eyelashes, do I have something that I could represent as the eyelashes? Oh, is this a toothpick? Perfect. This, actually I'll break it in half. We'll have two eyelashes. Let me move this up just a bit. There we go. All right, so the eyelashes do not begin on the inside of where the eye is. Let me see if you can check that. So it doesn't look like that, and that's really creepy, but a lot of people do draw eyelashes coming out right from where the eye and the skin flaps meet up. But in reality, they actually begin right on that edge. So right where the shelf ends and it kind of dips down, that's where the eyelashes come out. Now, mind you, this is a very scary looking eyeball. But if you can imagine that these are beautiful eyelashes, they would begin there and not so much on the inside. And I like to think of the skin folds as being heavier. Another reason why I like using clay, because then it's easier to visually see the thickness of the skin around it. And even as we look at my eye here, you can see how there is, I think in makeup it's called the waterline, and that's the shelf that I'm talking about on our little clay model here. That's there's a distance there, and it's important to include that. You generally don't see the upper shelf as much because the way that our eyes are facing, unless if you were looking at me from down below, you could see the upper waterline, but for the most part, you rarely see that, and you'll always see the bottom one. And obviously, a lot of that depends on the structure of one's eye, but generally, you'll see the bottom waterline more so than you'll see the top. And I have very deep set eyes, so you can see how I have a really kind of like a old Hollywood. It has like a very high crease, so you like can see the implication of the roundness of my eyeball because of that crease. Now, there's been a lot of different eyes that I've been enjoying drawing over the years. My favorite is a hooded eye, so where the skin it lays over the pocket of the eye, so it creates a very thin looking fold. And like I said, this will vary from person to person. Everyone kind of has their own eye that they enjoy drawing, and that's where you get into the same face syndrome that we mentioned earlier. And I'm going to talk about why it's actually important and why it can hinder you in your art. But I think it's good to understand the difference. Okay, so now that our really creepy eyeball is out of the way and you kind of understand the thickness of the skin, that's important to keep in mind. It's also important to know that this isn't 100% accurate because, like we were mentioning before, there's no bubble, there's no contact going over the iris. But I guess the other thing, no, I'm going to put the clay model away. We'll stop scaring the kids. Okay, I'm going to make my head camera smaller here. There I go. Into the corner like a bad kid. Okay. Actually, I'm going to make this even smaller. My head does not need to be that large. Okay. So you can see when I was doing the CG cookie tutorial here, I was kind of imagining this being clay. Obviously not my favorite drawing that I've ever done. But the important thing to see is this shelf. And that's exactly what I was talking about. And let me zoom in. The eyelashes, if you couldn't tell by my demonstration on the clay, meant you draw the eyelashes coming out from here, not from here. And be sure to include that lower ledge. I see a lot of people forget it. And then same with the upper one. You can kind of, I feel like I should have made it a bit darker, but it's right here. And you see a lot of artists in the Renaissance time that have these clay looking eye drawings, and they're very emphasized on these skin shelves. I don't know what the proper name is. Probably one of you would have a proper name. I tend to make things up as I go, and I feel like I make my own language, which for better or worse helps me, but maybe a lot of people don't understand me when I'm talking. It's good to know, though. I feel like I don't want to get into talking about eyelashes yet. Let me look what I wrote down. Okay, yeah, the next thing was on muscle memory recreations, which is the same face syndrome. So essentially, when I draw my characters, let me pull up some examples. I oftentimes draw them with a similar eye structure, a similar face structure, and it's one of those weird things that everyone kind of does, but it's hard to break it unless if it feels very intentionally broken. So let me pull, let's see if this will just drag and drop in here. Let me get, maybe I'll get like 3 of my eye examples. Because whether or not, oh, yep, that looks very similar. We all have tendencies to like different versions of, actually not even just the eye, of every facial structure. and it does tend to repeat on itself. Actually, I can even show this one. Sometimes I make the eye really muted, and I have a very contrasted look to the way I like to draw eyes. Let me pull a couple from 2015 and 2016. I feel like I drew a lot more characters in those years than I did the last 2 years. And a lot of this comes from drawing an eye blind. I feel like when I draw it from reference, it does vary a little bit more. Okay. So when looking at the eyes that I've drawn in the past, actually, you know what? I guess so it's easier for you guys to see. I'm going to copy and paste all of these. And I'll make them a little bigger. Because I think it's actually funny if you're able to call yourself out for doing these same type of things on all of your drawings. Because I really do believe everyone does it, but no one wants to admit that they do it. And at one point I would try to like defend myself and have reasons for why I'm doing the things I am, but in reality it's definitely same face syndrome. That's why it is good to do studies and mix it up from time to time, because you might learn something you enjoy better about the eyes that you're creating. Yeah, that one looks pretty funny with blown up head. Okay. So in these examples, there are a few things I love to do, and I'll point them out. The first is I really love a deep under pocket eye. So, oops, let me make a layer above all this. So I love a deep pocket. You'll see that in a lot of my characters. This was a self-portrait, so I guess this one doesn't count as much. But you can see with these three eyes, not only does it have a deep pocket, I like to draw big bushy eyebrows that have these kind of segmented lines within them. It's something that I've been doing for, I don't know, like 2 years, but I've kind of stuck with that look. And the main one I would say is I love doing a Kingdom Heart double iris ring eyeball, where essentially, if this was our eye, I like to add another ring in. And obviously that's very much a style choice, but a lot of my art lingers on it being realistic. So I'll throw in these small style variations. And I think that's what kind of made the eyes that I draw more my own. And you'll learn the more that you do this over time, you'll also pick up these little style variations that speak your own voice. And that's what will truly make your style. It's just a large collection of all these small little twistings of the way that you like to draw things, even though it like strays from the realism path or the way that you're taught. And that's how you'll define your own voice. Well, thank you for following. Obviously, the problem with that is after a while, you kind of draw the same variations over and over, and it creates the same face syndrome. Why, thank you for following. So while I do think that this does have its drawbacks, because then you kind of put yourself in a style box and it's labeled yourself. But usually, hopefully, if you do it right, you're the only one in that box. And then eventually you'll have people that try to copy and mimic your style if you become large enough of an influencer. And you should just take that as a compliment because they enjoy the same look of the way you're drawing your things. So, moving on from that, and I think you can also see I really like kind of a dramatic eye. I like having the cornea be pretty light, the iris being very light, and the pupil being very small. It creates a more intense look, and I've always been one for the dramatics in terms of art. Why, thank you for following. I'm sorry if that's really loud. Let me turn that down. I don't know how much that mic is picking up. Let me see here. We got another question. Art of Do says, I know I do the same face syndrome thing kind of purposely because I'm afraid my style will not look cohesive if I don't. Any suggestions for this? Honestly, if you enjoy drawing a face the way that you are, and even if you gave them different features like a larger nose or bigger lips or uh, uh, more of a linear eye line or like a smaller, I guess, less almond shaped eyeball, it'll still read as your style. I feel like it's hard for an artist to hide their style when it's so developed and they have so many years behind them of doing it. It's hard to escape it. So I wouldn't worry too much about that. I do think it is good to do, studies every now and then of different faces and different face types because I feel like that can only strengthen your same face syndrome, maybe, add a little bit of diversity. But I feel like we all fall trapped to that. And there's such a good and bad. This is one of the only issues I feel kind of gray in because I can see the negatives of it because then you're only drawing one type of face, you're only representing one type of a look. But at the other hand, you have a very distinguished style, and anyone that is familiar with the art world can point yours out in a crowd of faces. So then there's originality within that too. So it's weird how it can be, it's like a lack of originality while being a forefront for originality. So it's like this weird battlegrounds, I feel. And I don't think there is a good solution either way. But I wouldn't let it bother you too much. I see a lot of people that let it bother them. So try not to let it bother you. Okay. So how do we change the same, not only same face syndrome, but how do we make an eye look different? Well, let me go ahead. I'm going to draw an eyeball first and foremost. Oh, so beautiful, so serene. It's so much harder for me to freehand a digital circle than it is for me to freehand a traditional circle. I mean, that's okay, right? You guys can kind of comprehend that that's an eyeball. It's nothing inappropriate. Okay. So we're going to take that eyeball. And I'm going to do some variations on it. And this kind of is a callback to my CG Cookie tutorial. Actually, you know what? I'll leave it up on the side here. I'll make it smaller though. So I'll kind of do demos of what you're seeing over there with the different types. So remember that the iris has that little contact on it. So whichever direction the iris goes in, it will determine the skin folds around it. You know what? One last time, I'm going to make my head bigger. It sounds like an ego thing. I'm going to inflate my head even more. But as you watch my iris, watch how the skin folds around it change based on where I'm looking. And you can kind of see how the iris and the direction you're looking will change the weight of the skin fold and whether or not it's conforming to that little contact. And that's why, actually I should have got closer. Yeah, is this close enough for you? You can see how my skin folds around it react to that. And I think that's important to note of when you're looking in different directions. That will be a good helper in knowing, like, if your head angle is facing this way and you're not 100% profile to the viewer camera, you can see how the eyeball, they're both looking in the same direction, and you just got to imagine them as spheres, underneath all this skin and bone and muscle. So you can see how as I'm looking around, they're still moving the skin folds around it, but at some angles it looks very weird. So if I did this, like I cross my eyes, you can see how that will change the direction of the skin folds even. So anyways, I'll stop being a weirdo with my my big head here. Let me move it out of the way again. Okay. So I'm going to do my, I would say when I go into an eye standard, it kind of looks like this. And mind you, I think it's very weird when I see an art tutorial and the eyeball kind of showcases the iris in its entirety. I feel like not a lot of people have that. More often than not, the skin fold covers some of the iris. Let me move this down a bit. There's that little exposed muscle tissue in the corner of every eye, the little pink part. So if this was the cut, I hate when tutorials just simply do step by step like this, because I don't actually know if people are understanding or grasping the concept of the skin folds around it. Because I could draw those water lines on the top and the bottom. I mean, the top you don't really see because the skin folds on the sphere are so far down. The angle that the shelf would be visible would be more down, where the skin that's pushing up, it's so low that you would be able to see this shelf and the water line here. So anyways, this would be, I guess, your standard eye. Now, oh wait, I forgot the top part. Now remember, the upper part, the top skin fold, will always be deeper because when you blink, your skin fold is going down and it's pushing then back into your head, essentially, on top of the sphere of the eyeball, and it creates that crease. Now, not everyone. You'll see people that also have a very limited skin flap. They don't really have a fold that's very defined, and that does happen. So there are exceptions to the rules that I'm talking about today. The next one would be, you can imagine either a scared looking eye, and when you erase the pupil, I feel like the eyeball then loses some of that spherical look to it, and to recapture that, the way that you imply the skin around the eye with either wrinkles or the shading, that will help bring back the illusion of it being more spherical. Because I think that's where the eye kind of, it's hard for people to understand that these are just giant globes that are in the eye sockets of our face. And to reintroduce that sphericalness will help. Well, I thank you for following. Now, obviously, there's some bone and there's a brow here, so it'll push out. So you don't really need to, show the sphericalness all the way around, because then we even have the skin tissue from the cheeks and the mass there that meet the skin fold here, and that's where you get this, bottom flap. That's a little more subtle than the very heavy one we have on the top. And you know what? I guess I don't need to go through all the different types of skin folds, because there's an example right here, and we have another hour that I need to talk about a lot of other things here. But I'll do one more. Let's see here. I'll do a scared eye, because when you're scared, you lift. Not only usually the brow gets lifted, but then that lifts the skin fold, and it creates this surprised look. And then you would see that upper shelf and then the skin flap would be much shorter. I would raise that eyebrow way up there. And a lot of this can be implied, and we're going to talk about that in the style section too, because I think doing it right now would be too much at this stage. So I guess another way you can think about the skin around the eyeball is if you think of an orange, like the fruit. Here's a little nub. Let's say you cut a triangle out of it, and then you took all the pulp, all the inside out, you'd be left with the skin of the orange, and then there would be that depth from how deep the skin actually goes into the orange. Or I guess same with a pumpkin. A pumpkin's a good example too, but it's not as spherical. It has a lot more grooves on the outside. So I think I'm going to stick with my orange example. And then this would be hollow on the inside. And that would be the skin that surrounds our eyeball. Okay. I think I've been weird enough with that section. The next one is eye color. I think that one is pretty obvious, but you know, the eye color can range, and I guess it's up to well, I feel like that's more of a personal selection on what colors you want the eyes to be or what characters have what eye color. But the only thing I will say is if they have a darker eye color, oftentimes it will blend in with the pupil, especially if it's a really dark brown. It'll almost appear black. So let's say that it was really dark. Actually, even darker than this. And it almost loses some of the distinctive property of the pupil. And that's okay. That will happen, especially if you have a darker color iris. I feel like as artists, we often compensate by lightening it up, even with a dark brown eye, because it helps distinguish where the pupil is. And as artists, and as just people in general, we always look to the eyes, and that's why they're so important for a character. And it's almost like we over contrast. So that's more of a style choice. I think realistically, more often than not, it'll be a darker value than how we represent it. And the best way to, accurately depict that is if you bring your reference image, hopefully it's of one that you can use, you have consent to use it, and bring it in Photoshop and then grayscale it. Even people with like piercing light blue eyes, you'll be surprised by it where they are on the value spectrum, and they tend to be a little darker than what we actually think. And it's okay to compensate by making them lighter. You're just adding contrast to create a better look to your piece. I feel like I had another good thing I wanted to say about eye color, though. Oh, I feel like I'm forgetting. What was it? Maybe I'll come back to it. Maybe it'll just come back to me all at once. Oh, I guess another thing that's important to mention. Oh, no, you know what? I'm going to get to that in the next part. Never mind. The last thing is the eyebrows. The eyebrows are incredibly expressive, so be sure to use that to your advantage. If I had this shocked face and my eyebrows were like this, I mean, that looks very strange. It almost looks like I don't even know what kind of expression this is. It's almost like a serial killer. But if I make them way up in the air, they are super surprised. Actually, even with the same eyeball, I could have a different expression just based on where this furry caterpillar appears. You can see how now they're worried. Or even if I did now they're super angry. The eyebrows are incredibly expressive, so you want to make sure that you're using that to your advantage if you want to have more expressions within your characters. All right, I'm going to move into the next part of the tutorial today. Let me see if there's any questions before I move on, because I'm going to be talking a lot here, and I don't want to forget you guys. KLMLMCS says the depth here is so refreshing. The depth here is so refreshing. Thank you for going in such anatomical detail. It helps so much more to learn the underlying concepts behind the layout of the face. I'm hoping that I'm doing a good job. I feel like I'm stumbling all over the place because I didn't have enough time to do a better structuring on the back end before I started the stream, because literally 2.5 hours this morning I was just setting up an ADP account so that I can pay my future employees and have it be legal. And wow, was that boring. Uh, I'm learning so much, but it's a doozy. Anyways, talking about eyebrows, this is from Sophia Florist. Would you be able to draw realistic and stylized eyebrows too in the stream? I would love to get some tips if you can do it. Absolutely. I will talk about that. The last 2 demos I'm doing are a realism and a style demo. The next 3 things I'm doing, though, are separating and isolating and talking about the eyeball, the skin, and I guess the hair, so the eyelashes and the eyebrows. So we'll get into that. Okay. So let's go ahead and jump into that section. Okay, so the 3 parts of the eyeball. First one, the eyeball itself. The skin around it. And the hair. So we're going to start off at the eyeball. Why, thank you for following. So when we think of the eyeball, let me bring back one of my scary empty eyeballs. And I'm going to work on one of them. So I'll work on this far left one first. Oh yeah. Move this over. Been playing too much League. My keyboard is like all set up. I put my hand on the keyboard and immediately I went QWER. Woo! Maybe I need a break from that for a bit. I feel like that's how I unwind in the late evening hours right now when everyone's home, and Sean's actually learning League right now, so I'm trying to help him. Anyways. So the eyeball. There are essentially 3 parts to the eyeball that are good to understand. So let's talk about each. We got the cornea, the iris, and the pupil. So pretty easy, right? Okay, then we're done. We can move on. No, I'm kidding. The cornea is important because this is often the quote-unquote the white part. And part of my old CG Cookie tutorial about the face is that the white part is not white. And if you really do a close-up look at anyone's eye, it actually does have a value to it, and sometimes it's tinted a little warmer or a little cooler, I mean, depending on the person. I normally would say eyes are a bit this kind of really light brown hue that's mixed in with a very, obviously, like a whitish look. But I would say something around there would be the actual color of the eye. Or the white part, the cornea. So when you think of the cornea, yes, you can call it the white part, but just know you really should add some value to it. Otherwise, you'll have these striking white corneas, and it adds this very uneasy level of contrast that is not realistic at all, unless if the style you're going for has more of a contrasted look, and especially with if you're doing like an anime style, or if it's a very animation look. Even animation, though, I feel like has really pushed more toward like a realism shading. But I've seen a lot of people that have styles where the cornea is really light, but it's intentional and it works. So it can work, but just know it's not actually white. The iris, and that's the color part of your eye. And if you do more research on the eye, you'll learn that this is incredibly fascinating. Your iris can open and, well, I guess it's the pupil, and it's kind of a mixture of both. The pupil is essentially like a hole. Or based on the understanding that I was taught, if this is any way wrong, you can correct me, call me out, because I am willing to learn as well. But the way that I was taught was the iris is the thing. is the part of the eye that actually does open and close depending on how much light it wants to let in. And obviously, if there's a lot of light, your eye doesn't want to burn the inside of your retina, so it makes it really small, and your pupil becomes very, 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 very little. And it creates this very striking effect. And I feel like I've kind of adopted that into my characters, even if there's not a crazy big light source. And then when it's really dark, the iris opens up as much as it can because it's trying to let any light, any source of light it can into your eyeball so that you can actually see anything around you. And I think the best example of seeing the difference is when you have someone be in a really dark room for like a half hour and then put a camera up to their eyeball and then make it incredibly bright. And you'll see how immediately you'll see it shrink. And the iris is really cool. It has all these little stringy looking, fibers. And obviously they vary from person to person. They kind of look broken in the middle. There's like a, let me move back up. There's like an inconsistent inner circle that's kind of broken up like this. And then you see all those lines from there. But it's a very complex looking thing. Very rarely do we see people actually detail it to that extreme level, and it's very much implied, especially the further away from the face that you are drawing your character. So don't feel like every time you have to draw the eye, you have to spend 100 hours on the iris to make it accurate as possible. Almost always it's implied, especially in painting. You'll see like a very dark color to represent the part of the iris in shadow, and a lighter part that represents the iris that the light is actually hitting. And the third part is the pupil, so the dark hole in all of our eyes and into our souls and into our existential crisis. And that is the thing that will enlarge or shrinken, or I should say dilate. Maybe it's because I have a hard time saying dilate. I always want to say dilute, but I know it's not the right word. Dilate. And the other thing that is good to know, though, is very rarely do I see someone with an iris that is such a dark edge like this. And usually the iris doesn't have a very definitive endpoint. So I think it's better when drawing the iris to not have this super defined eye edge, or iris edge, but to kind of have it be softer. Because more often than not, that's how most eyes actually are. And every now and then you'll see someone with like a very intense ring around their iris, around the outer edge. And that it's really cool and striking, but I feel like it's not the most common. So it's actually more of a soft edge like that. Now obviously make it look way prettier than the way I did. And even with the pupil, it's also not a very super defined line either if you look close up at it. And it's not like this purple circle dot of black. And I think the more that you refine and go in and make it your own, the better. Like I said, I'm going to do more of a pretty realism drawing at the end. Why, thank you for following. But from now, just kind of understand those are the three sections of the eyeball and the three that you should be most... Oh, you know what? No, there is one more thing I want to talk about before I move forward. On the actual... Let me hide these layers. On the iris itself, if you remember, this is our side view of the eye. Really quick, I'm going to go over one more time. When light hits the eyeball, remember that it's hitting that contact, that little bubble first. So it's piercing through. This is our warm and sunny light. So same with the side view. It's piercing through and it's pooling at the bottom here. Now, the illusion that that gives, since it's pooling at the bottom, is that the top half will all be darker than the lower half, which usually would be correct because most oftentimes our light sources are overhead, especially if you're outside, the sun is always overhead and you're going to have that distance. But this also creates a really cool effect because the area in shadow, oftentimes the highlight is on here because wherever that sun is piercing through the eyeball, that is where the highlight's going to be. So the highlight from the side view, you can kind of see how it would be on that bubble, that little contact. But on a front view, it creates this really striking contrast of the highlight, the shadow underneath of it, and then the part of the iris that actually catches the light. And that's why you'll see eyes that have more of, let me pull the example over here back. This eyeball. You can see how, actually this is a good example. I remember taking this picture at CG Cookie. The light source is being blocked here. You know what, let me grab a different color. So the brow of my head, this whole part, actually more of up here, it's casting the shadow and everything within that is darker. So there isn't a true highlight on my eye because the area that it would be in normally right here is even in shadow from the brow, and there isn't a true highlight except for the area on the end of the shelf on my skin where the pores are. And that's actually a really good place to draw your highlights in. And I will give a better example of what I'm talking about because sometimes I feel like it's easier to see in visuals than me just explaining it. And I'll show you where to draw those highlights when I do the realism eyeball. Alright, so I'm going to move that back out of the way. Oop. Get out of here. And back up here. So remember that when you're drawing the eyeball, and where the highlight will fall depends on the direction of the source of said light. Alright, next one is the skin. And you know what? I'm going to actually even do that on this eyeball too. So I'm going to do it in a different color though. We're going to go for a dark purple looking color. So the skin around the eye, remember, would be that orange, that thing that I'm really trying to emphasize in this stream. I'll do a very simple looking eye. Or you know what? No, I'll do kind of a fun looking eye. Why, thank you for following. Now, mind you, when I'm drawing the lines over the sphere of the eye, I'm still imagining the spherical nature of the eye. So the way that I'm placing the lines tries to follow that. And every now and then, I feel like I'll have an eye that's a little off, and that's because I don't feel like it necessarily implies the shape of the actual eyeball underneath well enough. You can see I'm drawing the lines for the opening of the eye. And I feel like I've drawn so many eyes, I do have the muscle memory to immediately put that lower hood underneath, and then I'll start shading it. And I feel like a lot of this just comes down to muscle memory. And I think that's why you see a lot of established artists drawing the same face, is because while they're experimenting in other ways, they've kind of clocked in on how to draw the facial features, so all of them start to look the same because of it, and they're not really trying to do more facial features. And I'm not excluding myself. I definitely can accuse myself of doing it too. There's usually more stray hairs at the end. And always draw the direction of the... I mean, I'm doing a really quick portrait of an eye, but even I'm still pushing the eyebrow hairs in the direction that they would naturally be going in. And obviously, eyebrows can be really weird too. Sometimes they'll stick in different directions, especially unkempt ones. I feel like guys tend to have a little bushier, a little thicker, and a little more wild type of eyebrow. I'll draw some more sticking out. And obviously I'm going for more of a realistic eyeball in terms of the way that I'm styling it. And the area under here, since it's so hooded, would not be receiving as much light, and therefore it'd be darker, it'd be in shadow. Like that. So, I mean, we did a lot of talking about skin earlier, so I'm not going to talk about it in like to a degree that is just unbearable to listen to. So I'm going to move forward and talk about the hair. Oh, I guess I kind of did that with the eyebrow. Shoot. That was supposed to be part of the eyebrow. But I guess we just, we kind of slid into the third topic, which was the third part. Why, thank you, Verte, for cheering. I appreciate that. I will give you a Astrid in reply. There you go. Thank you. Okay, so the third part is the hair. So obviously this is the eyebrow part, but I think it's important to note, let me switch to another new color here. The eyelashes are something that I see done wrong all the time. And it's usually because of the level of detail at which the eye is at. Oftentimes you have these really simple looking eyes, or if you're doing more of a stylized character, and then all of a sudden you throw on these heavy, realistic, individualized eyelashes, it just doesn't look right. There are artists that can pull it off and it looks super cool, but I would say more often than not, it's because of their own, I would say, lack of understanding rather than it being like a cool stylized decision. So when doing eyelashes, you know what, I'm going to make all of these really light. So when doing eyelashes, the first thing to note is, like I was saying earlier, eyelashes do not start here. They do not start at this line. Eyelashes start at this line, and it's at the very edge of the shelf that is our skin folds, and same with the top, but as a better example, we're going to start with the bottom. Now the other thing is, your eyelashes shouldn't all do this. This is not how eyelashes work, and should not be represented that way ever. Unless, once again, I've seen stylized people do it, but if you're really trying to understand how they work in reality and do more of a realism study so that you can break that information into your style, awesome. I'm all for that. But when learning how to do realism, the way that you should do it is the direction of the skin flap is very important. So the ones in the center typically will come slightly toward you, but then as they go down, they'll curve outward. These are kind of long lower eyelashes, but they'll curve outward based on their starting point. So the angle here is going to be different than the angle on this side, if you understand what I mean by that. So the eyelashes on this side should go more this way. And you should definitely have them crisscross. Eyelashes are definitely not perfect looking, and the more imperfect you make them look, they'll actually look more perfect. And that's a very odd thing to say out loud, but it's true. So the more imperfect you draw them, the more perfect it'll look. And typically the eyelashes get shorter as you get near the edge of the eye, and they'll be really long in the middle. Now the upper eyelashes are a little different, and these are the things that throw people off. The eyelashes here do not do this. Eyelashes do have a curve to them, kind of like little fans, and they'll like, blow the dust away so efficiently. But instead, when you're drawing them on the top one, have them going down first and then up. And that's where you see a lot of the eyelashes get really long on the edge, because same with the bottom here, the direction determines where the eyebrow or the eyelashes point. So you can see these are good, I guess, 5 examples of how it turns because of the way that they're branching out of the sphere. And the more that you do of them, you create that illusion of an eyelash. Now the problem is the ones that are coming straight toward you, they don't go super high unless if you're wearing fake lashes. And I mean, even mascara won't make them look super crazy tall. A lot of the times they're coming right towards the viewer, right towards the camera. So they kind of have this flatter appearance, but they're a little more dense and a little heavier. So it gives that upper lash area kind of a framing to the entire eye. That's why you see a darker look near the top of the eye. And then mixed with the highlight in the pupil, you get this contrast where the lashes create this very dark looking frame against a lighter looking cornea, which often is much lighter. So I'm going to talk in the style demo about how you can imply eyelashes, because it looks very weird when you have a stylized character and then you have these very realism eyelashes. And I think you can simplify them in a way that doesn't make it look like short-handed or that you're trying to take a shortcut. It actually looks more fitting for the style that you're trying to create. Okay. Well, thank you for following. The next thing are different angles. So I'm going to try to go through this a little quick because we have demos that I need to get to. And I think are probably more important than the angle one. Here's how I'm going to draw a really quick profile, or not technically a full profile shot. I would say one of my favorite things right now to draw, I guess has been for a while, is a face that's in like 3/4 profile. And I think it's because for the longest time in college, I remember this being such a hard thing to draw. But then as we got older, all of us found it being so cool to be able to execute it. So that's all we started doing. Like we never went back to drawing heads that weren't in either 3/4 or slightly angled, because it almost showed a level of understanding, and we thought that that was so cool. We were very weird art kids, by the way. Okay, so let's say we're drawing a very intense look from straight on, or that was looking out ahead of them. Like I said, I'm doing very quick representations because I want to get to the next part, because I don't want the stream to be too long for you guys, and thank you for whoever just followed. Okay, so whenever drawing a character looking in a different direction, and it has more of an angle to it, you can still block the head out in all the different shapes. And if you don't know what those are, I think it would be good to just study up. I mean, even me, hell, I could always learn more about improving face structure and all that good stuff. But when I'm looking at something like this, I'm still imagining the eyeballs as these spheres. You know what, they'd probably be a little bigger. Mind the fact that they'd probably be a little more spherical. So the eyeballs would be like this. And for the most part, they should be facing the same direction and having the same look at it. But the thing that throws us off is the skin around the eyeballs. So like the nose and not even just the skin, but the structure of the actual skull and the facial features around it block the viewing of different, parts of the eye. And we try to compensate that by like pushing the iris so it is visible, or we push things around, but it almost brings it back to that realm of not looking realistic at all and more looking like we don't actually know what we're doing. And let me do one quick pass on the top of this to show one more thing. I'm going to do more of a heavy outline. When drawing the eye at different angles, you also have to compensate for the fact that you're drawing from the straight on shot, your iris is perfectly round. As you start to turn, your iris becomes more of an ellipse. And you want to, even with like my quick drawing, I tried to make it look too spherical or too much like a circle, when in reality it should be more ellipsed, because since we're seeing it more from the side, it's not so much a full circle, and it becomes more of an ellipse. And the same that if you keep turning the head, the iris would keep slimming out until eventually you'd get more of a side profile shot. And I'll maybe show you really quick after this how easy it is to do a side profile shot. It's kind of like my, I guess I don't want to say it's the reason I always do side profile, but they're definitely fun to draw. So I'm drawing that deep pocket. Same with underneath. And if you're ever having trouble with this kind of stuff, overemphasize it. Make your lines darker, make them bolder, make them bigger. And then you can simplify them as you go. Especially if you're working digitally. I mean, we can just turn this layer's opacity down, and we can, you know, draw on top of it and use what we drew before as like a guideline, as like an example almost. And then for this side, I want to do the same thing. Come up and around. Same at the bottom. And something to be careful of is you don't want to push the pupil forward. You got to remember the pupil it's not convex like the lens on the surface of the eye. It's actually concave, or closer to concave, so the pupil would be, you know, further back. And the more that you turn your head, the more that the pupil wouldn't rest on the edge of the eyeball like a contact would, but the more that they'll be sitting inside. It frustrates the hell out of me when I watch a movie and someone wears fake contacts, because since that the color is so flat on the contact itself of what is supposed to be the iris, it sits on the front, and you can always tell because it has like this, it's like an upside down empty watermelon, and it looks very strange, especially from the side. The colors are going all the way, you know, towards almost the bubble of the eye, when in reality, you know, if this was, when in reality, it'd be more flat, and that bubble is where, well, thank you for following. And the bubble is what you would see more from a side angle than you would the iris. So when someone wears fake contacts, just look at them from the side. It's very obvious and very distracting. Or that could just be me and I'm way too picky about movie magic. And I think at that point, I would just color correct them afterwards. Especially like high budget movies. There's some movies where I'm like, you spend $1 million of VFX and they're wearing $20 fake contacts. I don't know. It just seems very strange. Very strange. Like I said, I'm also too picky. Okay, so get this fake contact out of here, and we'll move the iris back. The light source would be coming from overhead most likely, which would give a darker appearance to the top of the the iris, and the light would be catching more down there. And then lastly, let's say that this face is only going to be viewed from this far away. Why, thank you for following. Instead of drawing each individual eyelash, oftentimes you'll see people just make this upper part darker, and then maybe like show a couple stray lashes to imply that that dark part is the full set of lashes. And then on the bottom, you know, just give a little hint to it and call it a day. Same with this side. Make that part darker. Something like that. You know what though? I took a step back from it. These are some really big eyes. I'm gonna make them a little smaller. I feel like I have a bad tendency to make eyes way larger than they should be. I think it's because I just love drawing eyes so much. And I think I tend to make them a focal point by just making them like hella big. And that's not really the path that I should be teaching. So you can see the difference before and after. Here it looks like some weird, what's that new movie that came out, the Battle Angel, Alita, where their eyes are just way too big and it's a little uncomfortable to look at. This is a little more realistic here. All right, so that would be drawing them at angles. So that I could do a whole stream on just drawing the eyes at different angles, and I think we would use reference. You know what, maybe I kind of want to do that next week. We'll see. We'll see how I feel going into next week. But really use reference, take reference of your own eyes, and really look at them at different angles. Move your head around and also change the direction that you're looking, and do studies of them. I think it's the easiest way to really understand how to draw eyes at angles, and hopefully that works for you. Okay. Whew, the last two demos, which will be the realism and the style demo. Now, this was the header of the tutorial that I did today. Right, that I posted today, but I did not draw today. So this was a drawing I did long ago, and it was to show the difference between drawing more on a realism level and more on a stylized level. Let me grab, though, I'm pretty sure I have, where did I put the original? There it is. So let me move everything out of here, out of the way. All right, a little blurry. Bear with me today. So when looking at the difference between left and right, obviously the left side has a softer value approach and edge control, and almost like a lack of edge control. I'm letting lost edges define the shape and let implications of where the head would end kind of guide the viewer's path into the shape. Where the right side, the stylized, I'm telling you exactly where the hair ends, where the head ends, where the eye ends, where the mouth ends, and it's a slightly different look. Now, mind you, I'm only like varying slightly from the realism look, but you can see how the edge of the hair is very different, and more specifically, the way that I do the eye is different than the one on the left. The left has more of a focus on contrast in values. The right has more of a contrast in the actual pupil, and it has this it kind of like an anime look, because I'm literally stealing the way that Kingdom Hearts does the double iris, and I love it so much. And I like applying it to more of a realistic render because I think it creates this cool effect. And with the eyebrows, I'm just blocking out a shape. And I think that a lot of people do that when stylizing their eyebrows. And the left side's not the best example of a realism eyebrow, I think, because I did this drawing really, really small. Where if it was larger, and you'll see high realism or hyper realism on Instagram or anywhere you look, where when they do eyebrows, you see every single individual hair, and it's not always in the big clump, but they're kind of strays more on like the edge of the eyebrow itself. So I'm going to talk about the difference between drawing, or the approach to realism versus the approach to stylized. And the best way to do that is to show this. Where is it? So this tutorial I did, and I really went through step by step how to draw an eye, but this is the tutorials you see all over the internet that I don't know how helpful they actually are, because I think doing things like the stream today, where I go into more detail into understanding the eye, because I think if you understand the actual anatomy and the proportions and what's going on behind the eye, I think it's really difficult to understand how to draw it. And I think these step-by-steps, yeah, it's great you know how to draw one eye, but if your entire collection of work from here on out is just a single eye, I don't know if these are the best. So I'm going to go through these 6 steps, and hopefully they help. Well, thanks for following. Maybe in understanding how to shade and value the eyeball, but I think understanding, like I said, the foundations are more important. So we'll go through each of these. The first one is to block out your rough shape and forms. And you know what I guess I can do? Because how much time do I have? Okay, I got like 27 minutes. I'm going to do this live with these steps on the side. And hopefully, let me make sure you guys can see it. Move these layers over. Okay, so step 1 is the only one that's going to be kind of covered by my head. But basically, the first step is to block out rough shape and forms and be loose with your initial lines. So let's go ahead and try doing that over here. Mind you, I'm not working traditionally, so bear with me if this isn't as pretty, because I feel like I'm more comfortable with traditional. And once again, here's a handful of excuses that mean nothing to anyone and no one likes hearing, so why am I saying them? Okay. So I'm going to work a little quicker. I feel like, especially with digital, we have such an accident forgiveness because of everything. And I feel like sometimes that can hinder for the worse sometimes, because then we don't care or put enough effort into caring about our understructures because we know we have the capability to edit like crazy. If there's something that I learned from different teachers along the years, it's don't always use the same type of mark making. Cynics is a great example. He's another online tutorial person that I've always admired because he works more in like sharp angles. And I feel like I've always worked in such flowy, smooth curves that sometimes it's good to throw these sharper angles to add a contrast in my work and showcase kind of both, because I think getting too comfortable in one over the other can I don't want to say hinder your work, but I feel like it's limiting the amount of opportunities or options you have for yourself, especially with an underdrawing, if you only have one type of line. So let's say, all right, so there's my block out, and then make a new layer above that. I'm going to change the opacity down, because the next step is placing the initial detail outline, so rough out where the shadows lie. Now this is a very oddly specific step where a lot of people don't do this, and trust me, I'm not going to like tell you, oh, you're doing it wrong if you don't do it this way, because everyone can draw however they want. These are just suggestions. If they work for you, great. If you have your own way of doing it, awesome. And we're just gonna, I'm just trying to show one path that you can take. Doesn't necessarily mean it has to be the path that you have to take. All right, so shadow from the brow would be a little heavier. You see a lot of classical artists do this, where they literally block out where the light sources are going to be and where the shadows are. It's something that I was introduced to, I want to say like a year or two ago. It wasn't that long, or like 2 or 3. And once I started using it, it really helped me start to see form better within my simpler drawings. You know what? I'll make this bigger. I feel like this might be hard for you guys to see. There we go. So basically when I'm doing that, the areas here, these are the areas that will be in shadow eventually, but I'm just blocking them out so I can see, give myself a foundation of where to shade upon. So that, which will actually be the step, which is to fill in the initial value pass. So let's go ahead and fill in where I blocked out all these shadows. Don't forget that ledge underneath the eye. I'm going to repeat that till I die. I feel like I want to see more of the eye ledges. You don't see enough of them. So you can see how by just placing in the shadows, all of a sudden there's a very distinct looking light source within it. And that's a good thing. That means that they're consistent and they're working well with one another. Let's see, I'm also gonna give just a little outline to that. Okay, the next section, step 4, would be to push your value ranges. Going darker, but I'm not focusing on the details yet. And thank you for following. So at this point, I'm still just looking at the values and working a little smaller. One of the best tips I learned in college was to work big to small. So work with a big brush first, end with a small brush. And same with digital. I think when you're starting out your compositions, lay out your values and all that first. Don't get into detailing too soon, or else you'll get stuck in a rut where you're detailing something that should have taken 10 hours, but you're 80 hours in. And you gotta be careful, because these are efficiency traps that, unless if you're careful, you'll be in the trap and you'll be digging yourself out of it from detailing too soon. And I'm telling you this because I did this all the time. And I thought I was being such a good artist and I was so dedicated, but looking back, I wasted a lot of time. And yeah, I learned from it, obviously. But if I would have avoided some of these traps, I feel like I could have got more done in the long run, because now I feel like I'm hopefully helping other younger artists skip some of these frustration steps that I had to make going through, and you can just become more efficient right off the get-go. So I'm definitely someone who likes to play with neutrals when it comes to my digital game. I feel like when it comes to pencils, I'm very focused on contrast, and a lot of that has to do with the inability to add color, and I'm so focused on contrast that I feel like I stray from realism a lot. When I do digital, for some reason, I always find myself leaning into realism a bit more and letting my neutrals and lack of contrast to speak volumes. And it's interesting how that can change for you depending on your medium. That could be just a me thing, I don't know. So you can see I'm softening a lot of these edges. Okay. So the next thing is to, now we can start adding some details. So now I'm going to make my brush even smaller. I'm going to go for even darker values, and you'll see what will happen. Now mind you, I am approaching this more on a realism end, so I'm going to push it the way that I would if this was more realistic looking. Because usually I would not fill in a pupil this dark. And actually, I don't even like how I filled that in. I want it to be a little more sketchy. So here's the other problem with doing realism like this, where you're edging things out. Oftentimes, it's so distracting when you have like a fine, crisp line and everything else is really smooth and soft looking, that it loses, it like breaks the, what would that be called? Not the illusion. Cohesion. It breaks a lot of the cohesion you had going on, because you have these now conflicting styles, and they just don't mesh well together. I'm going to make that wrinkle that is pushed back in the head from that upper skin flap much darker, while the lower one kind of sits a bit lighter. I'm still not worrying too much about, oh no, I guess, yeah, now I can start adding the details. So now the things like the eyelashes and the eyebrows. But before I do that, I'm going to make, this is way too light. So I'm going to do kind of a quick pass. How much time do I got? Okay, I got like 15 minutes. So I'll do a quick pass of detailing on this. If ever my eyelashes look way too perfect, I'll erase them and redo it. You want eyelashes to feel irregular. Like I said before, the less perfect you try to make them, the more actually perfect they'll look. Let's see if maybe I can answer a question while I do this. I got to go, but I hope you have a nice afternoon, evening, and enjoy your subway run. Well, thank you so much. You know me too well. And I will enjoy my subway, thank you. Maybe draw some of the veins coming in from the side. Oh, actually, this is a good example of adding in these contrasts. So this little pocket right here, I'm going to add this lighter color, and you can see how that instantly kind of flattens that top part, and then it pushes the folds up and down. So pushing a really light value against a darker value will immediately give more of a bulbous. It'll like bring either a part forward or a section back. And if you use that to your advantage, you can really make things push and pull in the direction that you would like. And then lastly, let me do the final details. So this is where I like to do the highlight. So I think doing it sooner than this is pushing it too soon. And I try not to have the highlight be perfectly dotted because of the way that I'm capturing the rest of it, where it has more of this like pastel-y look. I try to honor that everywhere, and that's why the highlight, I don't want it to be like a perfect, smooth circle. I try to also give it a bit of texture. Keep it consistent. Then kind of like I was talking about earlier, I usually like to put the highlights. You know what, this bottom ridge needs to be a little darker though. So you can see I'll bring the lighter color and I'll add the highlights right, I'll just kind of dot them along the edge of that line. And since the eyeball has like a wet kind of layer on it too, you can add a little highlight on the actual eyeball, kind of on this bottom part, and in this muscle tissue area, to add in the illusion that has more of a wet effect, as the eyeball often does. And then for eyebrows, like I was saying earlier, keep them in the direction that you want the eyebrow going. It's good to have a few strays here and there. I also learned that I like to curve them up when you're going this way, and then I like to push them down going from the top. Like that. And usually it's so thick on this side that it kind of blends into each other. So if I wanted to push this further, I would definitely, like let's say I wanted some of the darkers to be darker, just make a multiply layer really quick. But like I said, I'm such at a point where I like the lack of contrast to emphasize what I'm doing when I do digital, that oftentimes I just kind of leave it more in that mid-scale value range. But because I know contrast is flashy and it, has a cooler effect for the most part, I don't mind doing a little darkness here. Same with the eyebrow. And then after this, I'm going to do a stylized eyebrow. Okay, like that. If you want to see that layer on and off, you can see how it just pops a little more contrast. So going from those steps, let's review it one more time. I'll zoom in a bit. Alright, so step one was the underdrawing, kind of just laying out how the eye looks and being very loose, or try to be very loose. I feel like even to this day I'm still too structured. And then blocking out where the shadows will go, once again a very optional step. Starting to fill in those shadows based on with usually a single value. I try not to have too many values at this stage. And then I start blending it from there based on the shadows that were in the drawing already. And then I'll start doing my detailing, and then I'll do my final polish. And if that includes making it more contrasted, I'll add that as well. Now, this could be even taken further. I feel like it's still slightly goopy, a little messy looking. You can see how the one in my actual drawing example is a little tighter. But overall, I'm actually not too bummed with how it turned out. But the last thing I want to do with my 10 minutes here, I'm going to put all those in a folder. I'm going to hide that, move this over. So I'm going to show you how I do my eye normally when I draw a character. And like I said, stylized eyes, even if we're doing it from this type of eye example, I mean, even if you're drawing something that's more chibi-like, let's say, I mean, a lot of them could still follow that same example. Let me do another. I feel like especially in anime, you see these really cool, funky looking eyes. But they all follow that same recipe. They just do it their own way. So you'll still have your three parts of the eye with like an iris, a pupil, a cornea. Sometimes not a pupil, I take that back, but you'll still have obviously the eyeball part. And then like for this one, the eyelashes are these giant triangle spikes and it works. Or even if you had an eye that had, let me draw, what's a shape we can have in the middle? Let's say a star. I think most people, even though this has like an anime flair to it, I mean for sure it has an anime flair to it, they would still recognize that this is an eyeball. So you can change some of the attributes to it, but you'll still be able to recognize that it's an eye. So I would say have fun playing with different shapes of eyes and letting it be more your own. But the way that I normally work my eyes, I feel like I always do this, where it has these three lines on the top that are very much more structured. Have a softer lower line. You know what, I'll just take you, I'll draw it and then I'll kind of explain where I'm getting this from. You know what, I need to work bigger though, hold on. I feel so constricted working that small. Actually, it's not uncommon for me either to start with an eyebrow and then work from there. Make that way too big once again. Let me make that smaller. Obviously, I try not to have Liquify be my guiding hand when I'm doing digital, but when I'm drawing really quick, it seems to be a nice little fixer-upper. So I'm using that as my underdrawing. Like I said, I like doing that double ringed iris pupil. And for my eyebrows, it's almost like if you know what the pulp looks like inside of an orange or like a lemon or a lime. Imagine all of that clumped together, and that's kind of the way that I like to draw my eyebrows nowadays. It's a very weird look, but I kind of like it. It's almost like they're braided or something. A lot of times I actually won't draw individual eyelashes. I'll just kind of imply it with a messy look. Kind of like that. So then from far away, man, it still looks way too big. I gotta stop doing that. It's like my natural instinct. When I think working digital, it leans itself for me because I'm able to edit on the fly and correct things if necessary. I feel like I do get a little lazier if I was honest. That feels way better. And I guess if I was to give it more of a shaded look, I mean, oftentimes I wouldn't push it farther than this. I kind of leave it in the realm between realism and more of a stylized look. But I do like a really dark, sagging under eye. But not too much further than that. Like that. Okay. And like I said, doing your stylized eyes, I wouldn't worry too much about how perfect they look or how much they lend itself to realism eyes. The only thing I would pay close attention to is, are they in proportion and accurate to the style that you've created? And I think that's a good point that I actually encourage people to be stylized, but I think it's good to learn realism first to then break it. Okay, I did a lot of talking today. Let me see if there's last questions here, and then I will go ahead and cut the stream out. Molten Sin says, is it better if the iris blends with the white of the eye, or should there be a sharp line? I definitely think blend. I think it should be a very short blend, and if you look really closely up close at an eye, there isn't always a very distinctive line that separates the two, but it's more blurry. So I think recapturing that to the best of your ability would be my suggestion. Jim says, hey, so do you ever find painting on a digital screen hurts your eyes after a little while? Absolutely. I normally wear these yellow tinted glasses. They reflect I believe they reflect ultraviolet light, or not even ultraviolet. What are those called? It's like the high intensity blue light, I believe it is, and it reflects it. So it doesn't actually go into your eye. So if you are interested, you can find them anywhere. I feel like if you just type in computer screen glasses, you'll find ones. I mean, these were a little pricier. These are Pixel glasses. I like them a lot, and it's a great company, but I think it was like $70. And I'm pretty sure you could find cheaper ones, but I do know these ones have worked really well for me. So I'd recommend them. Altmage says, thanks for a tutorial on eyelashes coming from cartoon anime style. First, it's been hard to figure out what looks natural without being too over detailed. Yes, so you kind of have to learn where is your detail range. And imagine if this was the detail range I had on this style version down here, or on this styled eye, and I came in and was like, you know what? I'm going to really add these realism lashes though. You know, I'm going to even take away that level of shading. It looks very weird when you have a level of detail that's so thin and so sharp against everything else that has more of a painterly, quick look to it. you zoom away, it looks a little strange. You take them out and you replace it with just more value. And actually, I mean, these aren't the worst I've seen from me. But even in this case, I think it actually does look better without the lashes. So yeah, level of detail with lashes is important too. And Teddy TC says, missed my cue, I think. Is there a way you could post the image with the steps on the Discord? Absolutely. I will do that right away before I head out. Okay, so I'm going to cut the stream for today. Thank you guys so much for coming to this live stream on how to draw eyes confidently. I hope this gives you more insight into actually understanding the eye rather than just follow a step-by-step direction on drawing the eye. And thank you so much for coming to the stream. Like I said, if you want to be critiqued live, we're going to have the critique stream in 2 weeks. I am planning a lot of fun things on the back end, and I will announce them if I actually can get them scheduled and lined up. That way I'm not announcing things that won't happen and I don't get your hopes up for nothing. So thank you so much for coming to this live stream. I hope to see you next week at the same time. And until then, stay active on the Discord community. I will be there, and I will keep posting my in progress stuff for those who are interested. All right, take care, everyone, and thanks for coming. Bye, 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 bye. Let me find the right OBS app. There it is. Okay, bye.